everybody. I'm here with David Baldy, who is the publisher of Spellbound Comics, a brand new imprint. And his previous life, you were a Hollywood writer and producer, and you worked on shows like Wilfred with Elijah Wood and Deadbeat on Hulu. And why in 2022 did you decide to become a comics publisher?
Um, so I was a comic reader my whole life, and I'm sure as most people who are comic readers do, they dream, at least if you grew up reading in our era, uh, we dreamed of publishing our own comics one day. And it was sort of an unfulfilled dream of mine for many, many years. And as I pursued my career in Hollywood, it was a distant thought for me. It wasn't at all in the forefront. But then the pandemic hit. And I don't know if you had this experience, Derek, but during the pandemic, I read more comic books than I had since I was a teenager. And as I was reading those, just to escape from the somewhat awful reality of what we were living in, uh, it reignited the passion to publish comics. I also happened to be living in a city where I was, to put it nicely, bored. And I realized that having left Hollywood, that perhaps part of my boredom was that my creative itches weren't being scratched. So I ended up taking a writing class online with the legendary JM DeMatteis, and just to do something different during the pandemic. It was an entry level comic writing class, and I had written and even sold a comic before. I didn't think necessarily that I needed the basic training, but I just thought it would be fun. I've seen him
Mm-hmm.
interviewed, and he was a really enjoyable person to listen to speak. And, he's written some of the best stuff I read as a child. Justice League International, I went on to write primarily in comedy in Hollywood. Justice League International, as you may recall, was a groundbreaking comedic comic book. No one had done
Absolutely.
that before. And I was a Marvel all in on Marvel guy at the time, and it was just my comic shop owner saying Justice League International is getting a lot of buzz, and I said, okay, I'm going to try that. I think I tried it on like issue 4, and I loved it so much. Back then, you didn't have the ability to just find the first 3 issues, so you just found them when you could find them in your travels. And ultimately, I did end up getting them all and reading them all the way through the whole run, and just absolutely loved it. And in some, at least small way, I think that probably influenced where I went with my career, because it was like, oh, like there are things out there that speak to me in terms of my voice. But um, that's a little sidetrack to the JM thing. After taking that class with him, I had a good time, and we just became friendly, and we were just keeping in touch. And I would just say, "What are you up to? Like, what are you publishing?" And he once in a while would just tell me about a creator-owned idea that he was working on that he was hoping to get published. And then one day I just said, "Well, would you have any interest in publishing them with me? Because I've been thinking a lot about starting a comic book publishing imprint. And I think that there is a business model out there that can succeed where professional artists, writers, colorists, and letterers are all used, and it can prove itself popular." So that's the answer to that question.
Yes, you are starting this as a Kickstarter imprint or crowdfunding because we can do it either way, right? I just did some reading on the site. You can order once this launches, you can order directly from the site as well.
Correct. My intention is, well, first, let me say something about crowdfunding. I have been buying crowdfunded comics for probably at least 5 years. We just mentioned The Cosmic Detective, which just showed up. That was a
Mm-hmm.
crowdfunded comic. Um, I personally think that in 5 to 10 years, you're going to see that blow up because it cuts out the middleman. And I'm not trying to cut out the middleman, but I do have, for my day job, my own small business, and I've learned a lot running that over the last 15 years. We are primarily available online, so I've have a lot of experience with online advertising and just seeing how all these things unfold and reaching customers. And I just feel like the reason that crowdfunding comic books have done so well on Kickstarter is because it cuts out the middleman. But that is not the primary reason to do it. The primary reason is because the creators can create without the handcuffs, and they don't have to convince some, what I'll call, network suit from my experience in Hollywood, that their idea is one that is worthy of being published. JM DeMatteis, with our initial project, which I'm sure you're going to touch on real soon, called the DeMultiverse, and we're releasing 4 all new comic books that he writes with 4 different artistic partners. Um, every writer who's worked in the industry for a period of time has at least one of these, what I'll call gold ideas that they're sitting on that just hasn't gotten around to being published for one reason or another, whether it was time or finding the right publisher, artists dropping out, whatever. It doesn't mean they're not worthy of the world seeing them. I had this as a writer in Hollywood with my own spec scripts. Every Hollywood writer has multiple spec scripts that they wrote in order to prove that they can write for TV and film, and those are used as their resumes or their calling cards to get their work. Um, Many of those are better than the shows that actually get made, in my experience. But you have to find the right person to get behind it, to back it, to direct it, to produce it, to act in it, all of those things that get the money people to release the money. And that's harder than writing gold material. What comics have over as an advantage over Hollywood is that they can be produced more cheaply. So you don't need to find necessarily somebody who's willing to part with $1 million in order to put that idea out there. You know, you can maybe part with $10,000 to put that idea out there, and it's worthy of it. I'm going to say, I really do believe in 5 to 10 years that crowdfunding will be a very big destination for name writers and name artists to put out their material. I know that's happening already to a degree, but I think what hasn't happened is the audience hasn't grown to the numbers that it needs to be to make this appealing for everyone. When you publish a comic book through Diamond, if you're doing a poor job, you're about 5,000 copies. And that can range up to obviously the spawns and whatever, then they're doing their special issues in the 100,000. But I would say on average, you're looking at 10, 15,000 copies are being sold on these titles. No one on Kickstarter is selling 10 or 15,000 copies of anything. If you're hitting 2,000, you are in the upper stratosphere. That is like a handful of people have ever done that. You are more likely to end up in 1,000 to 1,500 range, but the costs are all the same to produce the books. So they have to be amortized over the copies. So you pay more per copy. That's the turnoff for some people who are like, I don't want to back a crowdfunded comic because I have to spend $20 for a single issue comic book. That's right. Unless you can convince 10 friends to get in here with you and everyone else does that also, we get 5,000 copies sold. Everyone's paying $5. And we're still making the same amount of money or breaking even, but now you're paying the amount you want to pay. We just need to get the audience there. And I think once that happens, once it's figured out over the next 5 to 10 years, everyone's going to go there because then they don't have to answer to the monoliths.
Right, and speaking of those monoliths, you're wearing a Marvel T-shirt. I would say, even Marvel, there are books they have difficulty getting to that 10,000. You said, and if you are not one of those, I guess now top five, but Marvel and DC have moved away from Diamond. You're lucky if it's 2,000, and you don't have anything else to be kind of. You can't be a loss leader. So this makes a lot of sense. As you say, you have one of, I think, the greatest writers in comics, both working today and historically. You mentioned, let's talk Justice League International, Kraven's Last Hunt. One storyline called Abadazad that was so impressive that Disney bought the ruins of a company just to have Abadazad. And that's one of the times I've talked to JM about that. So we've got 4 books. This is interesting too. Layla in the Lands of After, Any Man, Godsend, or perhaps God's End. I don't know. And and Wisdom, with top artists too. I mean, so this is the DeMultiverse. And how did you get these artists involved?
Great question. So JM, some of these ideas, I've heard him say this in his podcast so far, some of these ideas are 20 years old, some are like 10 years old. Any Man is the most recent, I believe, because when he pitched it, it was the least formed. But like in the case of Layla, for example, he had quite a run on Dr. Fate with Sean McManus as the artist, and they've done other stuff since together. And JM calls Sean one of his favorite collaborators, and I've only known Sean now for about 9 months, but he is. It was like the first time I talked to him was like I knew him for 30 years. He's wonderful, and that's not even getting into his talent. I mean, I called him on social media this week the most underrated artist in comic books, and I do truly feel that way right now. He can just draw anything, and if you look at his website and his samples, the range is incredible. So when JM comes up with an idea that he's trying to get out in the world, I assume he's then going to an artist friend who he thinks is a good match for it, and he's getting permission to pair them up on it. So he's basically doing in Hollywood where you're making a package, and then he's trying to sell that package. And so Sean was already attached to Layla, to my delight. Um, and then with Godsend, there may have been more history to it, but Matthew Dow Smith was already attached to that. And then the other two, we didn't have anyone attached. And JM was very clear up front for Wisdom, which is the supernatural Western. And we should talk specifically about all of these titles later because I want to say some stuff about them,
Will do.
about my enjoyment of them. But with Wisdom, JM was very clear that he needed somebody who could do both the horror, supernatural, lots of blacks, dirty lines, and also westerns. And he kept pushing for Tom. So we finally said, Tom, do you want to do it? And Tom said yes. So we got real lucky on that. Tom, as you probably know, I don't know if they're necessarily all on social media, but he has a huge following. That's huge. Like, he's always the one people are coming out of the woodwork to be like, I buy anything that Tom does. I met a guy on Facebook. He's like, I only collect 3 artists. I forget the other 2. But it was more like the level of like Jim Lee and not Tom isn't, I'm just saying popularity wise,
Right.
like obviously
I
Jim Lee
yeah.
and it was like, and Tom was like the outlier of that group, but it's like, here's somebody who's like every issue, and he had missed a Kickstarter that Tom had done. So I helped him get to Tom so he could get that Kickstarter
Was
because
that
he can't get it.
Was that the Civil War vampire one?
Yeah. Cross.
Yeah,
Called
I
Clara.
have that. Yes, it's on my
Oh,
shelf.
do you? I
So
haven't read it. I asked Tom to get me one, and he hasn't. So maybe I'll send him this
yeah,
preview.
Mr. Mandrake, please, sir. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And then the last title, Any Man. David Baldione, I happen to have a relationship with him through social media because my name is David Baldy and his name is David Baldione.
I wondered if it was an alter ego.
Right. Yeah. Well, so that's not common for me. My name is not common. So to run into that and for it to be so close, I was like, I just kind of reached out to him and I loved his art. So I had bought an original piece of art from him during the pandemic. So we already had a relationship, really nice guy. And then this is pure luck. JM and I were already putting this project together and we needed an artist for Any Man. And JM had already sold the Ben Reilly Spider-Man series to Marvel, and they assigned him an artist, and they assigned him David Baldione. And he didn't tell me at first, but we were talking like a month later about artists for Any Man. And I was like, well, what about David Baldione? His style seems really great for this, and I think he's a really great underrated artist. And he was like, that's the guy who's doing Ben Reilly with me. And I was like, well, then it must be serendipity. So we asked him, and he said, absolutely. I found in this whole experience that pretty much anyone who's worked with JM at some point in his 40 plus years of writing for the big 2 comic companies, they will work with him again. I don't know that he has an enemy, and boy, does he have friends. There's not that I can detect any BS in JM. And we have become, I would say, friends at this point. I mean, we are emailing like 50 times a day and have been for like a year. I mean, it is official. If you went through my old mailbox, that he is the number 1 person that I've emailed with now in my life, I think.
Oh, well, that's okay. That's all right, and it's appropriate. I mean, you're in business with the man. So let's take those titles apart. Which the DeMultiverse, if you back it, the first issue of each, they're all bound together. It's essentially an anthology for the first one.
It's both an anthology, and we are printing the individual issues to be purchased separately. So there will be 4 floppies. Some people don't like that phrase, single issue comic books, 1 of each number 1. They will have a cover A by the series artist. There will also be a variant cover for all 4 by some of the biggest names that you know from the comic industry. We have only slightly revealed one of those names, which is J.H. Williams III. He did the Layla cover, and it is gobsmacking. Next week on social media, I'm going to reveal the other variant artist covers. This is a scoop for you. We did have one of them drop out yesterday, so I am now scrambling to replace him. Especially at the level of the people that I had, I don't want it to seem like one person is like a plug-in,
Right.
So in addition to the 4 floppies and the 4 variant covers on those single issues, we will also be offering it as a trade paperback called the DeMultiverse Collection. And in that book will be extras and special features. JM will write an introductory essay to all four. He will tell you where the idea came from, when it got to him, that sort of the history of it. There was one or two that they tried to publish at one point, and like the publisher went out of business or the artist fell out or whatever. I don't even know all the exact history. It will also have a foreword written by Tom DeFalco. And the reason we got Tom is because I asked JM flat out, if you were being inducted into a comic book hall of fame, who would you ask to give your induction speech? And he said, Tom. And I said, great, let's reach out to him. That's who I want to write about your career and this project. Somebody who knows you intimately for the longest period of time. I believe they've known each other since about 1979, certainly around 1980. And when Tom became editor-in-chief at Marvel in the late 80s, he brought JM back to Marvel because JM had been over at DC doing
Right.
like the Justice League International. And without that decision, we wouldn't have Craven's Last Hunt, which I like to tell everyone, the Hollywood Reporter said might be the best standalone Spider-Man story of all time. So,
Well, and it certainly affected Sony's plans, because to me, if it weren't for Craven's Last Hunt, they wouldn't be making a solo film or made a solo film. Anybody watching this, Craven's Last Hunt, I guarantee you, will be much, 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 much better than the film we're gonna get. But you know,
I would say that's true.
yeah. But so if you can find a trade, a collection, I'm not sure if that is. I had the original, so I don't know if that's collected anywhere right now, but probably. So let's break these down. I mean, because the other thing that's impressive is they're all different genres. You mentioned Wisdom. I'm almost going to go in reverse order here. One, because that caught my eye because of Tom Mandrake, and as I said, I love his work. A supernatural western.
Yes. Wisdom, JM doesn't want me to say this, but I keep saying it, and I'm like, JM, I speak the truth. It's just the way I'm wired, and I feel like people can sense that off of somebody. I am not somebody who's a big Western fan. I wouldn't even call myself a big supernatural fan. And let me pause for 1 second and back up and tell you a little ramp up to this. When he and I were discussing doing a crowdfunded comic together, it was originally going to be one title. And he said, well, I have tons of ideas. Let me pitch you an idea. And he pitched me Godsend. And I said, JM, I like this, but my background is in TV and my connections are in TV. And I would really like a title that I think has a good chance to become a TV show. And I'm not sure this is the one that I want to put all my eggs in that basket. He said, no problem. Let me pitch you another one. And he pitched me Layla. And I read Layla and I said, I'm having a similar feeling. It's great. I loved Abadazat. I love his fantasy. I can't wait to read it. If somebody else was publishing it, I would have been buying it. There's no doubt about it. But did I want to put all my eggs in that basket and for something that I didn't think was a slam dunk TV show? Then Wisdom came along. And I'm like, oh God, it's a supernatural Western. I already know, Westerns have been out of vogue for so long. Fortunately, they're coming back a little bit now with Yellowstone and other stuff. But Derek, from a period of years here and working, interested in pop culture and whatnot, Westerns have been, cold, to put it nicely. And I read this pitch document and I truly believe, if he can see this through to the end, that this is one of the best things he will ever have written. And I have read a lot of JM stuff. Mm-hmm. We have mentioned Craven's Last Hunt, and also his runs on Amazing and Spectacular, which we haven't mentioned. We have mentioned JLI. We've mentioned Abadazad. We have not mentioned Moonshadow, which for some people, including Matthew Dow Smith, one of the artists on this, the one doing Godsend, he said that is one of the most influential works of his youth and what led him into wanting to work in comics professionally. And, so many other projects that JM has done. I want to see Wisdom printed through a complete storyline. It is so good that I was like, crap, maybe I do want to go all in on a supernatural Western.
Well, because I want to say, what I've seen is everything is cold. It gets cold until the right project comes along, and then everybody wants to do it again, right?
Yeah.
So this could be the thing.
Absolutely. So Wisdom is actually the reason what motivated me to come up with the idea to do all 4 books, to do more than one book, is I was like, shoot, I really want to do Wisdom, and I don't want to put all my eggs in a Western basket. What if I do all of them but we just do one issue of each, and then we'll let the audience decide which one continues first. Because then we'll have built up this audience who buys the first round, and we'll know, not in terms of dollars, but in terms of verbal commitment, who would support it if we went to number two. So you kind of are operating as a business knowing you have a certain baseline that you can count on. And so I said to him, what if we did all of these as one anthology? Maybe do three, maybe do four. I would prefer to do four. I think it's cooler. And he said, yes, I love the idea. Let's do four. And then he pitched me Anyman, which wasn't a full pitch document. It was like a paragraph. And I'll just move on to Anyman real quick and tell you that Anyman is the one most likely to be a TV show. And I loved it. It's most my taste. I tend to like the mainstream superhero stuff, like The Boys and Invincible and those, of the stuff that's come out over the last 20 years. And this is there with me. It has a really great twist in it, and it's very enjoyable. And as I said on social media today and recently, I'm already a fan of David Baldione's. I think more people would be if they just were exposed to him. But he absolutely is doing the best work of his life on this title. If you looked at the Ben Reilly series, it was pretty phenomenal. He does really great expressions, especially if they're comedic reactions. A lot of emotion in those faces, and you see that times 1.5 in Anyman. It's really great. I can't wait for people to read that one.
So that's
you want me to talk about?
Yeah, I mean that's a mainstream superhero one. I totally got that as like, well, that's that. Let's go to God's End.
Okay.
I shouldn't say it that way. Godsend, which feels a little superhero-y from what little I can see. And,
yes.
And when I say, by the way, anybody again, everything I have seen is what is on the Spellbound comics site. So you can go and check it out too.
Awesome. It's funny, I was laughing because you said God's End, because Matthew, the artist, when I first started engaging with him about it, would call it God's End, which was the first time that I saw that you could say it both ways, because I just saw it and immediately said God's End. And I said to JM, it's interesting that you can play this both ways. And he's like, isn't it? Yes, it does seem superhero-y, but the way that JM likes to pitch it is that it's more akin to Jack Kirby's New Gods, in that this is a celestial being. It is not somebody who got superpowers. I will tell you that the opening 3 pages of this book might be my favorite 3 pages of the entire project. And then it flashes back to like I don't want to spoil anything.
Don't.
It's all like here, and then you're here, and you're going, how is this going to end up here? Does that make sense?
Yes, I get it. That's cool. And then Layla in the Lands of After, back to fantasy. I know that JM, was very heavily influenced by Lewis Carroll and obviously L. Frank Baum. Abadazad was kind of that, plus his own, spirituality. Because that's the thing I said to him the first time I met him, was just like, he was the first writer I suddenly recognized there was, I don't say an agenda, but a personal touch. Like, as soon as spirituality showed up in a Marvel comic, I'm like, oh yeah, that's JM DeMatteis. Okay, I dig what this guy is saying. So.
Yeah, I think spirituality is the right word for what you're describing. There is a common theme in what he does. It's just, I think it's just more like writing about, and now I'm having trouble choosing words, but like the what makes us human. We're not just machines, and here's the emotional whys of that. Specifically with Layla, it's a story of a girl, a 12-year-old girl or 13-year-old girl named Layla, who is riding home from her friend's house, and something happens to her that we're not quite sure at first what it is, but she wakes up in this strange Oz-like world called the Lands of After, and we find out that she was killed. She was hit while she was on her bike, and that's why she's here. And she will run into both new and old friends on her journey through the Lands of After, but being sort of a confident, take the bull by the horns character, she's like, oh, I'm not ready to be dead. So we're going to have to find a way out of here, and you guys are going to help me. So They're like, well, no one's ever left before. She's like, well, we're going to change that. And so it kind of becomes, this is probably uh, not not the right words to say. I feel like I'm underselling it when I say this, but it becomes an Oz-like adventure where she is with this somewhat ragtag group of characters from her past and newly from her present, and trying to find her way to the head of the after, lands of after, and to find her way out.
So I do want to ask then, we do the first issues of all four of these. One is going to go forward. Do you have the hope, the plan to finish these all out? Because
Oh
my
yes.
guess is I'm going to love them all and be annoyed that I don't know what
Well,
happens next.
here's the thing. I what I've discussed with JM, I'm really not good at filtering, so I might overshare here. But you'll benefit from that. I I would love to see all four of them at least continue to like a trade each, so we can get a complete sort of story arc for all of them. Um, Financially speaking, the amount of money that I was investing to do this project, it could have been doing that to one title or doing four different titles, one issue, seeing what happens, and then putting one forward if all goes well. I chose to do it that way because I thought it was more interesting. I thought it would bring us more publicity in that we do have four amazing artists who all have their own audiences. And a lot of people release one crowdfunded comic, even people with JM type pedigrees, and you don't necessarily hear about it. But if someone's coming out of the gate with four, maybe that's more likely to make you sit up in your chair and take notice. So, from a marketing point of view, that was the reason. Um, this is where the overshare comes in. If people vote, and I don't know if we're going to offer it as an option or we'll just see how the voting goes, but they would rather see all of them continue. We have not ruled out the possibility that we will just do a number two of all of them and do a DeMultiverse number two crowdfunding, and just do it that way. The reason that I didn't want to commit to that route is solely that you would be waiting. I don't like to wait that long to read an issue. So you're already looking at 6 months from issue one to issue two in the current path. I would rather you wait 6 months and then I can give you a complete story than to do 6 months, here's the second chapter, and 6 months, here's the third chapter. You
Yeah.
understand?
Do. Okay, so it's up to us. And it's up to us to vote. When does the crowdfunding actually start?
We have not publicly committed to the date, so I'm not going to commit to it right here, but I will tell you that it is in early to mid-October. It will probably land between the 7th and the 14th, somewhere in there. But if you're on spellboundcomics.com or any of the social media sites for Spellbound Comics, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so is JM, and he is tweeting and posting all of those things. You will find out. You can also go on spellboundcomics.com, and on the main page, you can put in your email address, and we will notify you of
Which,
the
by the way,
launch.
people, I just did before before I
Thank you.
logged on to this to make sure. And yes, follow everybody because yes, I mean that's the thing. I found out about this because I follow JM, and then you reached out, so which is
Perfect.
awesome serendipity. Yeah.
I want to say one more thing on the subject of whether or not we go to more issues. Um, I have numbers in my head for where I think the campaign will end up just based on extensive research into crowd-funded campaigns with certain talent levels. Um, I am optimistic that I will break even. And if that happens, we will have the money to continue to reinvest and do it again and break even and do it again and break even. I will most certainly not be getting rich off this. But if by some chance this thing blows up, and we have seen, for example, Berserker, I believe, is the number one crowd-funded comic book of all time. Obviously, they had an unfair advantage with a A-level movie star attached and all the publicity that comes with that. And I think it was pre-sold as a movie. But nonetheless, it proved you could do $1 million for a Kickstarter comic book. I do not have any uh, dream like I do not have any realistic expectations of getting to $1 million. But if we can get to $100,000, we can probably put two of these forward. If we can get to 135,000, we could probably put three of these forward. It just depends on how much the people show up. And to tie this back to something you asked me earlier, we will be offering it on Kickstarter for the traditional 30-day period from that sort of October 10th-ish date until November 10th. It will also be available on spellboundcomics.com, but I'm also going to continue to have it for sale on spellboundcomics.com at least until we actually send it to the printer, which would be maybe as many as 2 months after the end of the campaign as we assemble and design the trade paperback with all the extras. The 4 comics will be done by the end of the campaign. Right now, they're basically in coloring and lettering. So there is a chance, since it will be for sale beyond the 30 days, just like Amazon selling the same books every month, every year, that people could continue to support it over a longer period of time, and that will generate the money. I am not doing this as my primary income, so I don't need to make money off it, but I want to get the money that comes off it to be able to reinvest it and keep people that I love to read and look at their art employed, making stuff that I like to read.
Fair enough. David, thank you for taking the time, and I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I signed up. I will back through Spellbound because I did not realize how much of a haircut Kickstarter gives you. So,
Thank you.
so support that way, everybody, or if you prefer Kickstarter. But let me stress that what David just said is this is guaranteed to come out. This product is almost done. I think that's a reticence people have had about Kickstarter in the past is backed a few things that never appeared. But
Please,
this will.
Let me say one couple sentences on that. I've backed about 20 Kickstarter comic books over the years, maybe 25. I only can think of one offhand that hasn't come, but that will not be us. I told you earlier, I have a small business. I've been doing that for 15 years. I operate like a professional. That is very, very important to me. I do not want anyone to think that they're taking on any risk by investing. They're not. The only risk is whether you're going to get it March 1st, April 1st, April 25th. We have no idea. Once we send it to the printers, everyone says, especially since the pandemic, that you just have no idea when the printers are going to get it back to you. But the moment they do, we will distribute it quickly and efficiently to you. That is not going to be a problem. All 4 issues, the artwork is complete. The coloring and lettering are done on 2. The coloring is half done on the 3rd one. All of this will be done by the end of the campaign. We will have some variant covers coming in maybe a little after the campaign, and we will be assembling that trade paperback. That's it. But the core 4 stories and the core covers and some of the variants, it's all done and ready to go. I've already paid for it, so I might as well get it in your hands.
Thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out on any Fanboy Planet video content. And visit fanboyplanet.com for other features, reviews, interviews, previews, and of course, listening to the Fanboy Planet podcast. And remember, use your powers for good.